OCTO TALK from Computacenter, where we discuss the latest market trends and technology innovations. Today we're talking about the topic of observability, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues from the Office of the CTO, Martin Henson, who's our Chief Technologist for Networking, and Dean Hogan, who's our Chief Technologist for Applications. So thank you for joining me today, both.
It's great. Great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So observability is a topic that we're talking about, and obviously, two different areas of the business. We're going to talk about it from different lenses. But let's start off by asking the question, what is observability? So maybe, Dean, I can ask you first of all.
Yeah, sure. There's a formal definition. Maybe we should start there. I'm not too sure I always subscribe to it, but I think the observability is defined as the ability to understand the internal state of a system by measuring or using the external outputs that it provides.
Okay.
That's a formal definition. I prefer to kind of say it's a little bit broader than that. So I always like to try and take the conversation more towards situational awareness.
Okay.
So if you want to understand the situational awareness of something, you understand the who, what, when, where, why, and how.
Right.
So, observability shifts from understanding what's happened when something has happened, and to some degree where it's happened, into understanding more about why it's happened, and understanding how you actually resolve it or address something that's occurred, and maybe even who does it as well.
Okay, well, thanks for that. So, Martin, maybe I'll ask you from a networking perspective, your view on observability.
Yeah, so I guess in reality, in the networking world, hasn't really necessarily evolved that much, but in the way that people tend to look at it is the visualization of the IP flow, so the way that traffic goes over infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And that's how they typically look at as a definition of observability. And then there's some now evolvement in that around the likes of how AI affects networking.
Excellent. We'll talk about that a bit later on. So I have had some customers say to me, well, where does observability start and analytics stop, or do the two conflict, or they complement? So have you got any thoughts on that, Dean?
I think analytics is an intrinsic part of observability. In order to understand what's actually happening in your environment or a system or a state, you want to be able to ask questions, right? And observability does promote the ability to ask questions of a system and understand a little bit more, gain insights. And analytics has always played a part of that. Mm-hmm. Being able to kind of like query something. The only challenge is you tend to need to understand what you want to ask it, how you want to ask it. There's a specific set of skills that come along with that. Maybe as we talk a little bit more about the AI topic, we'll see about how that maybe is changing and shifting. But yeah, for me, analytics is an intrinsic part of observability, but by no means where it starts and stops.
Excellent. Anything to add to that, Martin?
Yeah, for my world, it's domains. So we have all these different domains. We have the campus and branch, which we've all known for years. The WAN, the service provider element. Mm-hmm. Now we've got carrier neutral facilities. Blimey, and then you've got the cloud, right, and everything that sits in between. So you've got all these different points of information that has to be ingested in some sort of type of platform, and then on top of that, you've got the likes of your logs, the flows, etc. So there's all these different information points that have to go into a platform, and you do need that smarts, that analytics, the ML, if you wish, around that. Then, as to Gene's point, in terms of how you then interact with that data and drive value from it.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for that. So from a business perspective, then, why is it important to kind of look at observability to see, how that can support, maybe things that you're doing, how you're going to market, how you're developing solutions? Why is it important from a business perspective to look at observability?
I certainly am seeing that there's a greater recognition. I don't think it's not that everyone's been blind to it, but there's a greater recognition that the actual requirements for executing different parts of a business process, kind of looking to understand how your business is performing. Actually, there's a lot of, elements of your business operations that need to come together to be able to kind of like connect, not only deliver the service, but actually you need to examine in order to understand what's going on. And potentially, if something has happened, occurred, How do you respond? How do you understand the impact that that has? Now, businesses are clearly large, complex beasts. IT systems are growing in their complexity, and there's a lot of shifts and changes around the technology that's used to implement, those IT systems. Yeah. And what was, typically IT isolated domains that kind of provided some part of that IT system, businesses need to understand now how they all connect to be able to support either a user experience, a business operation end to end. So that's becoming a key factor, I think, in businesses, understanding that we no longer need just monitoring. We need to move more towards observability.
Excellent. And just thinking about obviously the two of you in terms of your roles, from a networking applications perspective. Sure. Have you seen yourselves needing to work together more internally to help support our customers, externally in terms of the things that, or the different parts of their business? You mentioned it briefly there about different parts of the business coming together. How have you seen that kind of play out, moving forward? Maybe Martin, if you want to give us a view on that.
I think for networking, I think what Dean does is very different. Infrastructure, delivers capability to get to an application, and there's a journey that it goes through. And those two worlds are coming together. We were discussing it earlier, where they are not colliding necessarily. I think they're just becoming as one. Yeah. And that language and that understanding, to Dean's point, then you've got to put it in the network context, which is slightly different. And I think that's where we do rather well. And we're going to have more joint conversations, clearly, because networking is only one facet of what is a larger architecture.
Certainly, we're seeing some of the trends around where and how enterprises are implementing observability, and it kind of tends to draw it to something of a more unified way of, the technologies that they use, and the architectures that support observability are trying to be more centralized and unified. Yeah. That still has a tendency to kind of treat elements like networking as a bit of a black box. Yeah. What I think makes observability at an enterprise level successful, or still a protracted challenge of how do I connect different parts, is around your ability to get a little bit more inside that black box and connect things in a more native way. And there's strategies that we talk to customers about that.
Okay. So if a customer wants to get started on observability, probably a couple of questions here. Firstly, where do you see it normally starting in the organisation? Is it one place, or do you see it manifesting in multiple? And what's the best way, in your experience, for someone to start on the journey of observability?
So I talk about 4 motions generally that I'm seeing. And to some extent, they demonstrate that observability is already happening to some degree. So firstly, I talk about modernisation of tools. So there is always, in their relevant IT domains, a recognition that there's new technologies into the market. There's access to open source tools. That means in my environment, and software delivery teams, product teams, application developers are a good example of, I can actually get access to the tool. I can actually look after my own little ecosystem and actually demonstrate and exercise observability, kind of elements of observability in doing that. Yeah. So you continually get tools modernization going on. There's a degree of standardization wherever possible, and that might happen in different parts of the observability architectures that are implemented. It might well be on how you deal with telemetry, or it might well be how you visualize some of the data and some of the information you want to access. But generally, there is a degree of standardization that can happen across some IT domains. Okay. And then you've got some degree of consolidation, and that's generally driven by sort of like cost savings, etc. That's happening perpetually. There's always a bit of a technology sprawl. We want to be able to kind of simplify our technologies and tools that we're using, and that drives a centralized model. And then we move to a 4th motion that I talk about, which is around unifying observability. And that means intelligently, because we always like to think we're intelligent when we tackle these things. Human motivations, behaviors always kind of tend to interfere in some of those endeavors. But being able to kind of connect different IT domains to what is a centralized platform for being able to draw all of the telemetry together and deliver some as a service experience for everyone to benefit from is the fourth motion. So where do we tend to get customers starting? Well, firstly, there's already some degree of start in some of the IT domain areas, some of the communities. But otherwise, we start to kind of like get into a conversation where they're trying to unify something, centralize something, and then we try and steer with an opinion on how do you tackle that the right way that will set you up for future moves and changes.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that.
I don't want to lead you into actually how we solve it. I don't want to give too much away too soon, but there's definitely a separate conversation that we open up.
Excellent. No, that's good, and maybe it's one for a future topic. So, Martin, just thinking about that, clearly there's obviously similar things going on from a networking perspective. Looking at, I've had conversations with customers where they want to understand more about what happens on the network, how they can automate some of those, or some elements, or some part of the environment based on the things that are either traveling through the network or things that are happening. What are you kind of seeing in that space from a customer conversation perspective?
Good question. So I guess the reality is, things like, let's use NetFlow. It's the most common that all network engineering, we see in terms of giving you telemetry information. What we see there is that there's obviously a move for visualization, and that's been around for a while, being honest. But then what we then see is that when you start looking at really from an inside out and outside in, there are a lot of vendors out there that can provide that capability. So now we've got two facets of information there, right? So inside, outside your infrastructure as well. And then you've got the logging and all that telemetry, and you've got the line of things like open telemetry is having a massive impact in the networking world. A hyperscaler capability now that's moving southbound. And it's what do we do with it? It offers something that's very unique versus legacy protocols. And it's how do we then, where do we put it? How do we rationalize that data? How do we visualize it? And then how do we derive some business outcome from it? And so one of the most common conversations at the moment is if we're creating an observability narrative, right, how do we take all this disparate technology and, as Dean rightly put in his fourth analogy, is then put that into one place and then do something with it, whether it's visualization, whether we want to run AI ops over the top of it or ML ops. That's really new to the networking world. And then you've got the likes of agent demographics, and also as well is getting people that come from the world of doing things via CLI, etc., to move towards a DevOps mindset as well. And that's also a particular challenge, a particular fight, because not all people want to move in that direction, but that is where the market is going, where we're just abstracting out infrastructure. And observability has a humongous part to play in there.
Yeah. It seems to be, lots of customers I talk to, they understand there's lots of data being generated within the organisation, not necessarily where it's being generated, how they can start to use that to either monetize or to improve experience, to drive different kinds of experiences. So given all the things that you've said, what are some of the pitfalls that customers fall into when they start to go down this journey?
The obvious one is the one tool to rule them all, as it were. But that's understandable. And while it's maybe a bit of an objective that you try and drive towards, I think everybody understands you never get there, and neither should you, in my humble opinion. But the one that I typically am seeing is there's a big focus on what is that core platform technology that I need to get in place that will deliver all of the features, capabilities, that will serve all of my internal stakeholders, what they particularly need in terms of supporting their processes or their particular technology areas and stacks, and actually feel that that's not only going to do the job, but that's the one place to start, and we just hoover everything into and draw everything into, whether it's centralized or distributed, but essentially into that one place. Yeah. Leading into what I mentioned or hinted at earlier on, what happens then is you typically get drawn down into a protracted exercise or program of change. Right. being able to get everybody onto that core platform, getting all of their data into that platform, whilst not impacting day-to-day operational capabilities and responsibilities, that's hellishly difficult. So you suddenly get to a point where you only get 50%, towards your target of centralizing, simplifying, consolidating, because what you've done is said everybody has to be able to deliver and migrate to this one standard, this one technology platform, and the way that that has been designed. So we always think about data is king. If you're going to move from one platform to another, you start generally not just thinking about the user, but also the data that underpins it. So we're always talking about how do you abstract and be more independent on how you handle your telemetry data, because that can be a key to expedience in migration.
Right.
So that's one of the kind of core dynamics. And when I'm in a room, I kind of go, yeah, you've got the idea about what platform you want, but think about your data and think about how you're going to be able to do that for all the use cases, all the systems, and actually get you there quick. You've got to start there.
Excellent. So would you say the observability journey should be driven by specific use cases rather than trying to take a holistic view, or does it have to be a bit of both?
I think it's a bit of both, because you've got use cases that will not only be important for certain individual consumers, but if you're going to unify something and try and drive objectives around cost savings and simplification, you've got to deal with a raft of use cases. And they'll continually evolve. We know how fast technology, features, capabilities in these platforms is evolving. Yep. So use cases will always kind of like be there as an ever evolving and demanding space. So you've got to deal with that alongside how do I deal with my back end technologies, data, and some of the things that are actually used to connect and integrate stuff together. So plugins, whether that's using APIs, how do you bring that all into a center quickly? Yeah. Because quite often there's also a bit of a licensing renewal technology, kind of like deadline that says I've got to get off this platform, otherwise I've got a renewal cost that's going to just break my business case. Yeah. So suddenly everybody tries to rush, and then everybody's in back to the walls and defensive mode because things haven't quite been delivered as quick as expected.
Excellent. So I want to change direction slightly, going towards futures, right? Because we've talked a lot about understanding use cases, looking at platforms, looking at it holistically across a business and how we can provide that view of information, data, flows, traffic, etc. Always in these conversations comes up around AI. Right? That is one area that we're seeing lots of evolution, very quickly. So maybe Martin, I can ask you, in terms of kind of the future of observability in the network space, what are some of the things that you are either seeing or you think may start to come to light?
I think AI ops for networking, definitely. As I mentioned earlier, we've got agent demographic. But also, there's a lot of, most engineers, they do really quite repetitive tasks that can be automated. And I think, having like agent AI, having the likes of LLMs that can do elements of work for them will be something that we will want to see. So that then engineers, they can upskill, cross-train, their DevOps skills as an example, allows them to evolve their careers. So I think we'll definitely see that. And as Dean said, technology is moving so quickly. We're in the age of AI right now, or networking for AI, which is another conversation I have a lot of conversations on. And I think with that going on, it's just moving at such a pace, and the industry is moving at such a pace that I think observability and those future trends will be linked to that, and it'll be more with less.
Excellent. Thanks, Dean. So maybe the same question.
AI, yeah. I mean, we've had AI in some various forms, machine learning. Because when I talk about AI in observability context, I talk about it in 3 areas. Predictive AI, causal-based AI, and generative AI. So the whole predictive and causal AI kind of capabilities have been around for a little while. I was talking to customers probably, I would say, about 8 years ago, saying, how do you successfully implement some automated remediation off the back of some insight that's gained from the technologies you were using? And the customer was like, yeah, great, let's kind of be able to automate those things. And then you suddenly hit service management, and then you start to go, right, we want to automate the remediation of maybe scale up, scale out, or some other kind of corrective measure. And they said, well, if there's an incident happened, I want to be able to know whether or not what the root cause is, and actually go back and understand that rather than masking it over the top. So you start to see some pragmatic necessities on how you implement AI starting to manifest itself in enterprise governed environments, especially when you're regulated and stuff like that. But importantly, I think there's some practical steps that are already available, which is actually from something that's measured, detected, and needs to be responded, I could still go in and kind of gather a whole bunch of, sort of insights, knowledge, information from the system and relay that to an agent or supporting group that can resolve it. There's an element of AI involved in that. To some degree, it might be determining on what it wants to pull together. And you can start to use generative AI in that capacity, right? What's the prompt that I would actually put into the system to get the information? But ultimately, when you start taking the human out of the loop, that's naturally where we want to, not want to, but where we are going. And that gets into some interesting spaces, especially when you're trying to deal with not just the generative response, but actually to what extent you have, agentic implementations of that process. And that, I think, is not too far away. We've already, see some technologies in the industry that enable that. But it's all about the enterprise being able to manage the risk, impact, and generally bring everybody along on that journey to trust it. There's still a degree of distrust in AI.
Can I add a point to that, actually? That's quite a really good, valid point. If we look across the vendor landscape, agentic AI in network management SaaS platforms, across all the vendors, absolutely seeing that. And I think the other question is the operating model change? Like, how do we consume that in our run books for our organisation? And that's, again, that I think is a bit of pain because it's new, it's different, and I think that really valid, which is the trust. Do I trust it? And I think as humans, especially when you're taking things away, we've seen that through our evolutionary cycle, you always get a degree of skepticism. And I think that just takes time, and that's definitely that is a future because it's a human response to something.
Of course, what you need is observability for AI, right?
Oh yeah.
You need to be able to kind of observe AI and look at drift, and so suddenly you've got some self-inflection on the whole observability ecosystem. But again, that's another interesting conversation, another time.
It is. I certainly see, the topic that you just mentioned there. Customers are wanting to be able to understand, ingest, look at data much more quickly, and almost have the decisions presented to them that they can select, rather than having to do all of that work themselves to find out. The AI can do the cause of this was X, Y, Z, and here's all the proof to do that, and here's the action that we suggest you take, and then obviously the human in the loop is the one then that can actually push the button to say yes, we agree with that.
War rooms change, right?
Yes.
And the processes that kind of are employed traditionally might not necessarily be needed in an observability world, especially when you've got, like you said, intelligent systems underneath, not telling you some information that allows you to determine the root cause, but determining that root cause for you. And that's the important part of what observability brings to the party, being able to connect not just all of the telemetry, but actually some context over the top that it's drawn from other systems that say, this is what's happened, this is why it's happened, this is where it's happened, and importantly, what you need to do about it because we understand the broader context.
In a natural language.
In a
natural language.
Yeah, I mean, visualize it even as well, right? So all of it, is available for everyone in an ecosystem to kind of equally access. So once upon a time, networking team would understand what's going on in the network, It'd be like the infrastructure team knew what was going on there, the application. Yeah. Now everybody's looking at the same kind of core telemetry, but importantly interpretation as well.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I remember from my days back in network engineering, it's always the network's problem.
Always.
All right. So, the ability to be able to look across all those different domains, observability will give you that opportunity to go, right, well, it's not the network. Yeah. It's this point here, and help us to resolve it. So, again, bringing together some of those different parts of the business to be able to resolve, operational problems more quickly is going to be, one of the results of having a good observability platform or system in place.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's definitely a journey.
Definitely a journey. We can definitely see the importance of observability. Clearly, as we said, all of us are talking to customers about it in different guises. It fits across multiple domains, within businesses. So, important topic. So, thanks for your time today. I hope it's been useful to those that listen to it. So, thank you for joining us today on OCTO TALK for Computacenter. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe on the usual social media channels so you can keep abreast of what's happening and what's coming next. But until next time, stay curious and keep innovating.